Okay, today we're going to talk about solving two-step equations. Now, when we go to solve an equation, I have some steps for you to go through that will help you always get the correct answer. So on the side here, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about each of the steps, and then we're going to go through and solve the problem. So let's go over the steps real quick. It says steps to solve an equation. The first thing you're going to do is always read the equation. Then you're going to circle your variable and coefficient. Remember, your variable is whatever you're trying to find. In this case, it would be g. And your coefficient is always the number that comes before the variable. It's kind of like the number that guards the variable. Then we're going to draw something called the river. The river is going to help us split the equation so that way we can make sure we keep things equal on both sides and keep it balanced. Then we're going to get rid of whatever the last operation and number that we said using the inverse property, and then we're going to solve for the variable using the inverse property and check. So let's go through the steps. Step 1 says read it. So we need to read our equation. So it says 2 times g plus 5 equals 9. Remember, this is not 2g. You have an operation here that's invisible. It's 2 times g plus 5 equals 9. You need to read it so that way you know what's going on and what you have to do. Now, after we read it, we're supposed to circle our variable and coefficient. So I look here and I see that my variable is g and the number came before it is 2. So that must be my variable and coefficient. So I circle my variable and coefficient to keep it together. I know they're not separated. And now it says draw my river. You always draw your river where the equal sign is, because that's where I need to keep my equation balanced at. So there's my river. This is what we call the river. Now it says get rid of the last operation and number you said using the inverse property. So I look here, the last operation I said was plus. Remember, operations are plus, minus, multiply, or divide. So it says plus 5. So that must be the very first thing I need to get rid of so I can solve for my variable. So it says inverse property. Remember, inverse property means opposite. So plus 5, what's the opposite of plus? It must be minus. So we subtract 5 from both sides. And what happens here is they cancel. They make 0, so they cancel. And now we bring down what we circled. This is the main reason why we circle, so we know what we still have left over. So I bring down what I circled. 2 times g equals 4. And now I need to solve for my variable. Again, this says 2 times g. This is why we read it. It's multiply. What's the opposite of multiply? The opposite of multiply is to divide. So I must have to divide both sides by 2 so I can get g by itself, and figure out what the answer is. So these cancel because 2 divided by 2 makes 1. So g equals 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my answer is g equals 2. The last thing is the check. Always make sure to do your check. So I go over here next to the answer and rewrite my problem. When I do the check, that means I have to insert or substitute my number in for my variable. So here it says g equals 2, so I must substitute g for 2. So this becomes 2 times 2 plus 5 equals 9. Order of operations, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 5 equals 9. 4 plus 5 is what? 9. So does 9 equal 9? Yes. So check. Don't forget to do your check. Okay, next problem. Uh-oh, it has a fraction. I know a lot of you are afraid of fractions, but let's go through this and make sure that your fractions are good to go. So here it says 2 divided by 5 times, remember when there's no sign there, it means multiplication, times x plus 7 equals 11. So now I need to do my second step, which is circle my variable and coefficient. Here, there's my variable, but remember your coefficient's whatever comes in front of the variable that's attached to it, and it's 2/5. So my coefficient is 2/5. And then it says to draw my river. So my river, remember, goes where the equal sign is. It helps keep my equation balanced. So whatever I do to this side, it must happen to this side. So that's my river. And now it says get rid of the last operation and number you said using the inverse property. So last number and operation I said was +7. So what's the opposite of +7? -7 on both sides. Remember, what I do to this side, it has to go over the river and go to this side. So +7 -7 cancels, makes 0. So I'm left with 2/5 x, or times x, equals 11 minus 7, which is 4. And now it says to solve the variable, for the variable using inverse property. I have a fraction here. In class we learned something we can do with a fraction. We called it reciprocal property. So reciprocal means that I can flip this upside down to get rid of it, and what I do to one side I have to do to the other side. So now here, if I look, these two cancel, the 5's cancel, the x cancels, or the 2 cancels to make just x. So that's 1x, or just x equals, now, I have a whole number times a fraction. How can I make this whole number into a fraction? Correct, you put it over 1. So now that I put it over 1, I have another issue. How do I multiply fractions? Well, we multiply fractions straight across. So 4 times 5 is 20, over 1 times 2 is 2. But I'm not done. What do you notice I can do here with 20 divided by 2? Right, you simplify it. So I can divide 20 by 2, and that gives me 10. So my answer is x equals 10. Don't forget to do your check. Okay, next problem we have is 7 equals 3 plus 2 times r. Here, if you notice, I have flipped the equation. This is what we call symmetric property. It says if a equals b, then b equals a. We can switch it, it's fine, it's the same thing, don't have to worry about it. So now let's go through our steps. The first thing says to read it, which we already did. 7 equals 3 plus 2 times r. We solve it the same exact way. Next thing, it says to circle our variable and coefficient. So we go here, here's my variable. Remember, my coefficient's the one that comes before it. But notice here, what kind of coefficient do I have? Is it a positive coefficient or a negative coefficient? If I look here, the plus sign means that it's a positive coefficient. I need to remember that when we have something later. You'll see that in the next problem. So now I circle my variable and coefficient, and now I have to draw my river to separate the equations. Remember, this is my river to keep it equal. And then it says get rid of the operation and number you said using inverse property. Here, when I read this, I have 3 plus 2 times r. This is a little tricky because I have a 3 here. How in the world am I going to do the inverse property to get rid of the 3? Here, the 3 is positive. There's an invisible plus sign. There's always an invisible plus sign in front. So it's positive 3. So the opposite of positive 3 must be negative 3. So I subtract 3 from both sides. So now I'm left with 7 minus 3, which is 4. And these cancel, bring down the 2r. So 4 equals 2 times r. I continue with my steps. That just changed a little, and now I have 2 times r. How do I get rid of the 2? 2 times r, opposite or inverse, is divide. So I divide both sides by 2. So r equals 2. And that's my answer. Now I do my check. Remember, I substitute the number in. So 7 equals 3 plus 2 times r, which was 2. Substitute it in. So 7 has to equal 3 plus 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. So does 7 equal 7? Yes. So that is check. Next problem. 2 plus 3 times p equals 8. So now I circle my variable and coefficient. Remember to circle the plus in front because that's belongs with the 3p. And what's invisible here with in front of the 2, since there's no operation there? It must be a positive sign. I draw my river. And now I can start my problem. So how do I get rid of what I didn't circle? Positive 2. What's the opposite of positive 2? It must be minus 2. So I subtract 2 from both sides. They cancel. 3p is what I'm left over with on this side. Bring it straight down. Equals 8 minus 2 is 6. I'm still solving for p. So how do I get rid of p? I divide both sides by 3. They cancel, so p equals 2. And then don't forget your check. Remember, I substitute the number in. So 2 plus 3 times 2 equals 8. 2 plus 6 equals 8. 8 equals 8, which is correct, and check. Last one again is with a fraction. It's a little bit different than before, so let's go through. I read it. This says 2 times x divided by 3 plus 6 equals 26. So after I read it, I circle my variable and coefficient. Here's my variable. My coefficient here is actually 2/3. It's a fraction. So I circle my variable and coefficient and draw my river. Now I can get rid of what I didn't circle. Here I didn't circle plus 6, so the opposite of plus 6 is minus 6, so I subtract 6 from both sides. So I'm left with, on this side, bring down what I circled, 2x divided by 3 equals 26 minus 6 is 20. And now again, I know fractions can be a bit confusing, but let's go through. Here it says 2 times x, because they're together, no operation there, all divided by 3. There are 2 ways that we can do this. One of the ways we already saw earlier was to do a reciprocal, but this way I'm going to try a different way and show you. So here we can repeat the steps that we had before, and I can circle 2 times x since they're both in the numerator, and what's left over is divide by 3. The opposite of divide by 3 is to multiply by 3. So that's how I'm going to get rid of this 3 in the denominator. So the opposite is to multiply by 3. I bring it to the numerator. And over here, since I brought it to the numerator here, I must multiply 3 over here. So now 2x equals 20 times 3 is 60. I'm still solving for x. How do I get rid of the 2? This is 2 times x. The opposite of multiply is to divide by 2 on both sides. So x equals 60 divided by 2. Simplify, and that is 30. Now I can do my check up here. Remember, I substitute in x for 30. So 2 times 30 divided by 3 plus 6 equals 26. I have to do PEMDAS or GEMDAS. So in the numerator, I have 2 times 30, which is 60. So 60 divided by 3 plus 6 equals 26. Still going through GEMDAS. Divisions next. So 60 divided by 3 is 20. So 20 plus 6 equals 26. 20 plus 6 is 26. So 26 does equal 26. So check.